From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and John Meoli live on a Thursday in late January. And John, baseball season hasn't yet begun. We're still weeks away from spring training, but in the minds of many, I think it has after the Ravens lost to the Bills in the AFC divisional round. Whew.
Yeah, how's your week been?
Sleep deprived, I'd say, and cold. Like a lot of people's, both emotionally and physically.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of travel involved in doing this job to any extent, but like the just lost the playoff game, like travel home is just like, it's just like you're drained and you're like, wait, what?
It's the worst.
At least this year for the Orioles, like it was just like,
you stayed at home,
took a car ride over to the Canton Square and started almost immediately just drinking. But like I think it took me like a week to recover from like the Texas like late game ending like 6 a.m. flight out.
Right.
Like it's really, really not pleasant.
It's brutal. Yeah, we were leaving the stadium and it's like 12:30 and it's like, well, at least it's freezing cold and awful outside, and we have a flight in 6 hours and have to be back, and also it's a Monday. Like everything wrong in the world was happening at that point. So yeah, not exactly fun. Let's hope that the Orioles have a better end of season. Let's hope that they go farther into the playoffs. Let's hope that we have a happy return to Baltimore if we're on the road at some point.
That would be fine.
That would be good. All right, well, we were here to discuss the Orioles, not the Ravens, and we're talking about the outfield because the Orioles just lost a player who gave them quite a lot over the last 8 years, a player who was in Baltimore about the same amount of time that we have been covering this team. He was a Rule 5 draft pick in 2016. We are talking, of course, about Anthony Santander, who just signed a new 5-year deal with the Toronto Blue Jays. My first year as an intern in Baltimore was 2016. I think your first year on the beat was 2016 as well. So really, we came into the organization with a young 22-year-old Anthony Santander, and we've seen him grow quite a lot. We're going to talk about what that deal means for the Orioles, the fact that they're going to have to face him quite a lot, the questions about their outfield of the future and how his departure impacts that. But we should give a little bit of lip service to the kind of career that Anthony Santander had in Baltimore, because he was here through some dark times, kind of like Trey Mancini, kind of like John Means. He was kind of like Austin Hayes and Cedric Mullins. He was a guy who was with this organization through the good and the bad, and a lot of bad. Played 8 seasons, 746 games, 155 homers. As a Rule 5 draft pick, you're not guaranteed anything. You're not guaranteed to stay with the organization. He stuck with the team. He overcame a lot of injuries early in his career. He turned into a very reliable player, played 152 games each of the last 3 seasons. It was a leader in the clubhouse by the time he is leaving Baltimore now, and became one of the better power hitters in all of baseball.
Yeah, and when you talk about the whole scope of it, like the player that he is now, I wonder, this isn't like a tough love works kind of thing, because I don't necessarily believe that whatsoever, but like he had a really, really difficult start to his time here. Obviously, not having any high minors experience to speak of whatsoever, coming in as a Rule 5 pick. He was injured. That's why he was available in the Rule 5 draft. And it was really hard for the Orioles at the time to fit in a 22-year-old player who wasn't ready to a team that was like clinging desperately on to being good.
Yeah.
That was a team that tried to win at the margins, and like one of their margin places was taken up by somebody who couldn't help them.
Yeah.
That was an open area of unpleasantness, honestly, for like those of us who are on the team on a daily basis, because he needed to be on the team at the end of 2017 and the beginning of 2018.
Played 22 games, I think, his first year.
Yeah, he was like banished, basically, like the second that they could get him off the active roster and like send him to the minors once his Rule 5 stipulations were satisfied.
Yeah,
they were like, all right, sweet, bye. And I talked to him about that this year, because it just like, that was a tough moment. He had to go and find himself as a player. It took a long time for him to do that, but pretty much from the moment he came up, I believe he was like a doubleheader call up in like early May of 2019, and he hit a home run and went back down. And then there was a few weeks, I guess, of more seasoning left, and he came up with like at a time when you could get like 161 days of service time for that year, which was strange. And what has happened since is a player who has taken care of his body in a way that he didn't at the beginning, who has learned to be a little more disciplined, not a walk guy, but like knows what he can drive, and to do it as a switch hitter and be able to be the guy you can write in the lineup for, no matter who the opposition is putting out there on the mound. That's very valuable for Brandon Hyde. That made things a lot easier. And I have mixed feelings about him not being on the team anymore, but I think that what he did for the Orioles is something that is really, really valuable.
Yeah. Delightful conversation to have anytime we were in the clubhouse. Obviously had a good relationship with Brandon Quinones, who's posted a goodbye. They both posted a goodbye.
I didn't see that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's going to be tough to break up that bromance. Those two really got along. He was really a steady presence throughout the last several years on this team. And even when the team was losing, he was performing well. And he deserves a lot of credit for how he built up his whole career. I mean, he came in under a different regime. This was not the Mike Elias regime. And all of those guys that were on the team, on the roster, somewhere in the organization when Mike Elias took over, they're not brought in by Elias and Sig, Meidel, and those guys. They have to overcome that hurdle. And he did. He showed just how valuable he was. And it felt like just about every year when the Orioles were losing, he was getting discussed as a potential trade candidate. The Orioles never made that move because he was simply too valuable. And by the time they got to the point where they were winning games consistently, they knew that they could rely on him in the lineup as a switch hitting power threat.
And Trey Mancini made it to, his last year before free agency. Was obviously traded at the deadline that year. But Anthony Santander, it turned out, was like for a team that the price of like experienced players was too high, no matter what the price was in a lot of ways. Like, it was really interesting to see, oh, this guy is worth $6 million. This guy is worth $9 million. This guy is worth $12 million. And like, that was the type of thing that, they appreciate it. What I think we know now that we didn't know in like 2020 is they're like saving $3 million to not have Jose Iglesias on the team, or like Hanser Alberto.
$3.5 million.
Yeah. Is that like they are willing to pay what they think someone is worth. And like, they paid him more than they paid anybody like over the course of time. And that's because he has been worth it. You cannot, he is not the type of player that like, if they had like the ability to draw up a player, that they would draw up, they would like somebody who like walked a little more and like didn't swing at literally everything. But when he does make contact and he gets on one of those heaters, he did damage. I've said it about, and we'll talk a little bit about Heston Kjerstad, but like the mark to me of like a true like big league like stud slugger is that there are 1, 2, 3 stretches of the year where you are just putting the team on your back and you are carrying them. Like, nobody got hot like Anthony Santander.
Yeah.
We appreciated that around here. And I think we understood that. I'm very fascinated to see, when he's in one of those periods that's in between the hot stretches, when he's like on like a 5 for 70. Not that's extreme, but like a 5 for 50 and like not hitting those home runs as the guy who was like the signature piece of the Blue Jays offseason, like how that goes. I don't know that they have like a nasty, like, I don't really know anything about Blue Jays fans, and I'd like to keep it that way, honestly. Like, I'm not, I'm fascinated to see how that goes there, because I don't know that he's going to change as a player. And that is what he is as a player. He's a guy who gets really hot and he ends up having nice numbers at the end of the season. But there are going to be moments where you feel like he's a lot better than that, and moments where you feel like he's not that good.
Well, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch how the life of his contract plays out. I mean, 5 years, $92.5 million. You're paying him into his age 35 season. There is an opt-out after the third year because all these contracts now have opt-outs just in case the player way overperforms expectations and wants to hit the free agent market again. But he is a guy who has tremendous power from both sides of the plate, hit 44 homers last year, but hit just 235 and had a 308 on-base percentage. So that equaled an 814 OPS, which is low for a guy with 44 home runs. It's high relative to all of baseball, but he did not walk a whole lot. He struck out a good amount. Had 2.9 WAR, and to be suddenly a free agent acquisition, a centerpiece of a lineup, and frankly, a centerpiece of an offseason. I mean, the Blue Jays tried and failed for the 8th offseason in a row to sign everybody else, and they ended up sitting there stuck holding the bag, realized that there was nobody that they could spend their money on and said, crap, we got to give it to somebody.
Yeah,
Anthony Santander.
Like early 2019, Chris Davis, just like no hits. Just like just a lot of not hits.
Yeah. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how this contract works out for the Blue Jays, because there are some red flags. I don't think health is one anymore because of how healthy he's been the last 3 seasons, but you never know how a guy is going to, go into his mid-30s. It's just always a gamble. I think he's probably going to end up being a full-time designated hitter sooner rather than later, because he's never been an above-average defensive outfielder. I know he was a Gold Glove finalist in 2020.
Yup.
But and he's developed a lot in that area. I mean, he certainly has gotten a lot better at playing the outfield than when he first came into the league. But he's probably going to have to transition to DH. We've seen him play a smattering of first base as well. Toronto has first base locked up with Vlad Jr., but I'm not sure that this contract is going to look phenomenal by the end of that 5-year stretch. But I think for the first couple of years at least, Santander, if he stays healthy, will give the Blue Jays a steady guy in the middle of that lineup.
Yeah, and I've struggled with how to think about this kind of, because even during the season, I know he didn't take it, but like it felt like like if he wanted to accept the qualifying offer and just bag $21 million and go back to the market next year, basically as the same player, year older, but same player, no draft pick attached, teams don't have to worry about that, then like that might have been a good move for him. And like, that's not to say that he's not worth the contract that he got, or, obviously wasn't deemed by the market to be worth more than that, but it's hard for me to say, okay, yeah, like this might not work out, because it's not an indictment on him as a player. And like most free agent contracts don't work out. So like, so you're kind of coming from a place of, okay, this is something that, you do to make yourself better now. And like, you're paying for now. And that's what they're doing. Quite frankly, it's just really challenging for me, because I don't think there's a lot of negative to say. And yet, like, for where the Orioles are, and we can talk about what they're going to do this year and in out years, like I don't know if that's a business that I want to be in for the next 5 years, even though the last 5 years of being in that business were awesome. And that's like, that's how baseball works. That's not like, it's not a fun way to think about it, but like, that's just kind of how I feel about it. I told him at the end of the season, I was like, man, I hope this goes really well for you. Like, if it's here, great. Like, if it's not, just like, because you deserve it. And like, this is a weird thing to be admitting on pocket. But like, I was like, you've worked, like, this is the point of free agency. Like, you work really hard and you get that payday. And like, he has, and like, that is objectively good. He was probably worth more to the Orioles than he made from the Orioles. Now he is going to be paid the way free agents are paid, which is you're paying for, a little bit of a premium for that past performance and hope you get something in return going forward. So it's fascinating to kind of talk it through.
We're very, I mean, on a personal level, I'm happy he got paid.
Go him. Go him. Like, if we were talking about like, gosh, I can't think about like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like an equivalent of like, I just don't know how well like the Blue Jays stuff works out. So like, that's why I'm like, all right, like the Blue Jays did this. Like they signed George Springer, he's awesome. Like they signed Kevin Gausman, he's awesome.
Right.
It's not all bad.
Right.
But it's just different.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating to watch. I'm just happy for him that he ended up playing the game of free agency well. And there was talk a few weeks ago, because we got to the point where it's mid to late January and he still hadn't been signed, and he's sitting out there with Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman, and fans are saying, well, if the market on Santander is cool enough, maybe the Orioles will dip back into the outfield and say, sure, we already signed Tyler O'Neill to a 3-year deal, but Santander we know is going to be good for us and we'll find somewhere to play him. Turns out the market wasn't that cold. I mean, ultimately he got paid about what people expected. I mean, I was expecting somewhere in that $75 to $85 million range, and he got 90 plus. So it ended up being a strong market. And we've seen with other players in the past, it just takes one bidder for your market to explode. And it's clear that the Blue Jays are kind of in desperation mode. And I'm sure that Santander's camp was able to, use that to their advantage. For the Orioles, they lose a guy who gave them 44 home runs last year, who was, kind of the heartbeat of the clubhouse for a lot of the season. They replace him with Tyler O'Neill, who hits from the right side of the plate instead of a switch hitter, is the same age, entering his age 30 season, is on a shorter and less expensive deal, 3 years, $49.5 million with an opt-out after the first year. How different of a transition is it to go from Anthony Santander to Tyler O'Neill?
It's a big change because I don't know that you are. I mean, I don't think the Orioles are going to slot Tyler O'Neill third or fourth in their lineup every single day.
Right.
We know he's going to be in there against lefties. I think there's going to be some real competition given Cedric Mullins and Kelton Kowser and Heston Kjerstad exist for him to get in there against righties. I think he will play against righties some, but I don't know that we're talking about an everyday player here. I was having some conversations with someone last year, and we were talking. This is when the offense was going really, really well, and they were saying, "Yeah, like this is really interesting, like the way we're doing things and how this is working." But like they always thought that the goal was to have 7, 8 everyday players, not have to hockey change based on who's pitching. And this is one fewer player who is in that category. Honestly, you have.
Yeah, how many guys are in that category?
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Westberg is in that category. Gunnar Henderson. I don't think anybody would expect Jordan Westberg, the first person I say there, but as I'm thinking of who is in that category, he was the one I was thinking about as I was talking. Jordan Westberg, Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Cedric Mullins, kind of. Ryan Mountcastle most of the time. Because when he gets on one of those heaters, it doesn't matter right or left. He's had years where he's better writing against right than left, and he's been really good against left, so that's saying a lot. But that's one fewer guy, and that means there's one fewer, utility-ish piece on the bench, and that matters to an extent, but not necessarily when you're talking about a bench that has Jorge Mateo, who theoretically can play anywhere, like Ramon Arias can play anywhere on the infield. It's not going to cripple them, but whatever you're gaining in having the potential platoon advantages that the moves the Orioles have made for their lineup this year, you're losing, just not having to worry about writing him in the lineup 150 times a year.
Absolutely. And in terms of the future of the outfield, I think that's where the conversation gets a little hairier, because if O'Neill's deal were guaranteed for the first 3 years and there were no opt-out, the Orioles would be much more settled, at least roster-wise, in terms of the outfield. But you add in the fact that he has that opt-out, and you're looking at an outfield that could change dramatically 1 year from now, because Cedric Mullins is entering his walk year, and Tyler O'Neill could be out the door as well. So I think best case scenario for the Orioles, when you're looking at the 2026, 2027 outfield, Tyler O'Neill plays well enough to warrant sticking around, but also not well enough that he wants to opt out and test the market again.
Yeah.
You're talking about Heston Kjerstad taking a big step forward and showing that he can defensively handle a corner outfield, and that offensively he's good enough to be in the lineup most of the time, and at least against righties. And I think you got to have good play from one of your top prospects in Enrique Bradfield Jr. I think he has got to reach AAA by the end of the season and perhaps be a top 100 prospect and give you reason to believe that he can be a starter in center field in a year or two, because you don't have too many sure things when you look at the 2026 outfield right now.
Correct. And I'm on the higher side about Heston Kjerstad, I think, then I don't know what the consensus is about him. It's one of those things where he's just been the same guy for like a couple of years at this point, not really getting the opportunities. There's a world where you could say that is a reflection on him. There's probably a more realistic world where you can say that is not. He was on. If he doesn't get hit in the head by the pitch when he did, there's a real case that he's playing every day in August, because at that point he had an 1100 something OPS.
He was great
in that month before he got hit. He was starting to do that thing that they kind of expected him to do. I think you are in a good place having Colton Kowser kind of locked in as one of those guys. I think there's truthfully a little bit of concern within the organization too, that the moves they made in the last year to shore up ultimately the pitching staff, if we're being honest about it, have left them in this position on the position player side where you're not really sure what you have, because Enrique Bradfield Jr., as we talked about, I believe on here, really did take a step forward once he got to Bowie. He really focused his swing decisions even more strongly. He was doing the things they want him to do. hitting the ball in the air, hitting line drives, and that reflected itself in some of the performance. They left the year really bullish based on that. But that's not that's still a lot to bet on.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like, you know, and there theoretically be a world where like Kyle Stowers is like here to be like a fourth outfielder forever, and like you feel okay about that? Like, sure. Was Matthew Etzel going to be in the mix to help the 2026 Orioles? Like, maybe, I don't know. He certainly did a lot of things well, but you are left in this position where you're feeling relatively good about like who you can have in there, and Kowser and Kerstad and O'Neill to an extent, but you know that based on how this team works, that like, I don't know if paying Cedric Mullins to stay here beyond this year is going to be a thing they do.
Yeah. I mean, the one big trade that really thinned out that outfield depth was trading Kyle Stowers and Connor Norby, who has outfield versatility, to the Miami Marlins in order to get Trevor Rogers, who made a handful of starts with the Orioles that did not go well. And they're hoping he can work his way back into that rotation conversation, but they're not necessarily holding their breath.
Yeah.
So they have thinned their pool of prospective talent that could come up and ultimately take a spot in the outfield. I mean, Enrique Bradfield Jr. is such a fascinating case because of the incredible tools that he has, and also because of the tools that he doesn't. You mentioned him getting even better at plate discipline. His coming out of Vanderbilt, I mean, his eye at the plate was phenomenal. Yeah. Had more walks than strikeouts over the last few years at Vanderbilt, and has gotten even better at that. He walks a lot, doesn't strike out a lot. He's got obviously blistering speed on the base paths. He is a threat to run whenever he is on first base or any base. He plays phenomenal, potentially Gold Glove caliber defense in center field, has a solid arm there as well. So he has those tools. The tool that he does not have in his tool bag right now is power. And that's something that the Orioles, from Matt Blood to Mike Elias, have said that doesn't really concern them right now. He's going to get bigger. He's going to get stronger. And even if he never develops into an average power hitter, his other tools will make up for it. But is there really room in today's game, John, for a guy that hits 5 or fewer homers over the course of a full big league season? Because he only hit 4 home runs last year in 108 games between AA and AAA. If his power never develops beyond where it is right now, can you really have a guy out there, for as good as his defense is and as good as his base running is, can you really have a guy out there that hits 5 home runs in a full season?
It would be very challenging. When I look at his season and whenever I was checking in, I wasn't necessarily looking at like, what his average was and what his OPS was and what, how many home runs. It was like, you're looking at the line drive rate. You're looking at, is he pulling the ball? Because that's what big leaguers do. They pull the ball for power. He's not going to be someone who is going to be hitting the ball hard very often. So when you not accept that, but you just kind of like look at it in that context, what really is going to define it is like, can he impact the baseball? Because we've seen a lot of instances with people much stronger than him, frankly, coming out of the Orioles system, who are getting to the big leagues, who are trained to, only swing at balls over the heart of the plate. And they get to the big leagues and pitchers can just paint on the corners. Like, if he can't impact the baseball enough to make people come into the part of the zone that he can drive the ball, it's going to be really, really challenging, because they will just not throw balls because they know he's not going to swing.
Right.
They know he's not going to hurt them in the strike zone. And that's how you walk, is by being able to hurt guys. It's not being able to not swing at balls. It's by being able to hurt them when they come in the strike zone. So, I don't necessarily endorse this thought, but like, there was an evaluator who was at a game, I think in Aberdeen, and all the scouts were like around talking before the game, and he was basically like, he'll probably just end up being like a bad 2-win player. And I was like, does that exist? A, I was like, does that exist? B, what does that even look like? But like, it's not, as a concept, crazy, because if you're talking about elite defense and like the ability to steal bases every time you're on it, you're basically talking about like what Jorge Mateo does in between those stretches when he gets really hot. Like, when he's not like a really good hitter, he's really not a good hitter.
Yeah.
And he is still valuable to a team like the Orioles, who need that. They have shown they value that. Cedric Mullins was really good down the stretch this year. He was an all-star in 2021.
Yes.
And there have not been, like, it's been down years offensively.
But he did hit 30 home runs.
Beyond that, he did. And there have been years where he's hit closer to like, I don't know what he hit in like 2022 or 2023, but it was not that many. It was like in the
around 20.
Yeah. So there's more power there, but the overall offensive impact was not what it was when he was an all-star. And because he could play really good center field, because he could run a bit, it kind of lifts the floor. So like I said, I don't necessarily agree with that statement. I was kind of confused by it, but it stuck with me. It's just to say that like there is value in what he can do, and we know the Orioles value it, and they're not going to say just because you can't hit doesn't mean you can't play, because there's long stretches where they've had guys who can't really play.
Right. Yeah. It's just tough when that guy is one of your top prospects. You know, it's maybe you pair him in a lineup with Heston Kjerstad, and suddenly that lack of power gets mitigated by the fact that Kjerstad is hitting 35 home runs. But it's just difficult to imagine Enrique Bradfield Jr. at this point ever becoming an average, let alone above average power threat.
No.
And so that's where my hesitation is when you talk about him being a long-term piece of the future. In terms of other guys that are not in the top 5 of the Orioles prospect list, Dylan Beavers is another guy. I'm not sure exactly how the organization feels about him. He got to AAA last year. He's the Orioles' number 6 prospect. He was a second-round pick out of Cal a few years ago. I think he was one of the competitive balance round picks out of Cal. Left-handed hitter. Hey, you've been writing swing school.
Spent a lot of time thinking about Dylan Beavers.
He has had undergone serious changes in terms of his swing. He had a really loopy, kind of funky swing when he first came into pro ball, and he's gone back and forth changing that. He still hits for a good amount of power, but there is a lot of swing and miss in his game. And there is, obviously a reason that he is not a top 100 prospect. Then you've got Judd Fabian, who hits from the other side of the plate. Orioles number 10 prospect, another early, night 1 draft pick coming out of Florida. He's more in the Kyle Stowers range of where Stowers was, as a prospect. He's the number 10 prospect, which is right around where Stowers was. And the Orioles showed that they never really trusted Stowers to be anything more than a 4th outfielder at times. Do Dylan Beavers, Judd Fabian, any chance that they could be starters in the future for this Orioles outfield? Yeah,
I think there's a chance. I think that there would have been more chance if we're talking about this last year. To start with Fabian, I kind of learned this to a little bit of an extent with Kobe Mayo, but like when somebody gets to a level and struggles there at the end of a season, like they get the chance to perform well there at the beginning of the season. It happened with Judd Fabian last year at Bowie, where he ended 2023 like kind of tough there, and he ended up being a pretty reasonable performer there over the course of the next full season. Same thing this year. He ended pretty tough at Norfolk. I think he struck out like 40% of the time, which is a lot, and you don't want that to happen, but you get the opportunity to do that again. Both of these guys kind of represent what the Orioles are working with in the player development side now, and they have a lot of hitters who either, in Judd Fabian's case, and I think Vance Honeycutt's in the same boat, like when they hit it far, and they have to make a little bit better contact, but there's also a lot of tools, speed, defense, that are, really, really strong that you can build on that, in hopes that, because that means there is something there, even if this deficiency that needs to get ironed out isn't ironed out. And on the other side, you have the Enrique Bradfield, Dylan Beavers, who really, know how to work the strike zone, know how to make contact really, really well, and need to impact the ball more. Also play good defense, also run the bases well. So I think there's a chance. They're both kind of in the prove it mode. I think there's like a school of thought emerging that like basically what guys are statistically in AA is what they end up being. And like what those guys were in AA is not something you're like trying to put into a first division team.
Right.
And that's where the rub is. Like teams know that like they're in a weird place because those guys are valuable, but like, are they valuable to the Orioles who there's a pretty high threshold of breaking through on?
Right. And that's why, to bring this back to Anthony Santander, that's why I really don't have too much concern about the Orioles' ability to replace Santander in the aggregate in 2025, because I do believe if Tyler O'Neill stays relatively healthy, that he could still give the Orioles 30 home runs from the right side of the plate, especially with the wall coming back.
Yeah.
That Heston Kjerstad, if he stays healthy, he looked phenomenal, like you said, when he was healthy and on the field last year. I really think that he could hit 20 plus home runs from the left side of the plate and take a serious step forward. I think Cedric Mullins showed that has shown that at least his baseline level of play is still solid defense, good base running, and will have a little bit of pop in his bat and is a good clubhouse leader.
Yeah.
And Colton Cowser, if he just replicates what he does last year, that's a solid season. And I think there's every reason to believe that he could get better next year. So you're talking about 4 guys there that I think can all be very good outfielders in 2025. But it's when you look into the future and you say, all right, is this conglomerate of Enrique Bradfield Jr. and Judd Fabian and Dylan Beavers, is that really going to produce any one regular big leaguer? Is Tyler O'Neill going to be on this baseball team in a year? Is Cedric Mullins going to be on this baseball team in a year? And that's why the stability of signing somebody like Santander to a 5-year deal might have been the most attractive part to the Orioles, because that is somebody that you can write in the lineup every day in 2026 and beyond. And not having him in there is just adds another question mark to the future of this team.
Yeah. And I think we're talking about different, levels of this as what I'm about to say. But, before it was like wondering what the outfield was going to look like. It was like having a lot of infielders and not really knowing where they would fit or when they would get here or how it would look. And the solution to that was, was like signing Adam Frazier and signing who was the Adam Frazier before the Adam Frazier? I don't think there was one actually. But
Rougned Odor.
Yes, exactly. That was the Adam Frazier before the Adam Frazier.
Yeah.
But you end up with these players who are there for 1 year and maybe they're playing every day at the beginning of the year, and maybe Gunnar Henderson type comes up and like makes their life a little different by the end of it. But I think like that is an area they're comfortable operating in. And like if you need an outfielder for 1 year and next offseason, like we know that the Orioles will pay, 1 year market rate for anybody. Not to say that like somebody who can help this team is going to sign a 1 year deal as an outfielder, but like it's not outside the realm of possibility. I think that this year and this offseason has shown us that like they are willing to spend money. They can spend money and they will, and they're not, because they were not either able to, in some cases, like agree to a long-term deal with somebody who wanted one or interested in other cases, like because that didn't happen. I think you can take it to mean that there's, they're trying to maintain flexibility in case something like this happens, in case they do need an outfielder next year. I think you're pretty set on the infield for a long time.
Right.
You're set at catcher, you hope, for a long time. Like there's only a couple of fluid spots on this roster. And I think as they are looking at that and how last year went, like you want to be flexible, and they're going to be able to spend money on that if they need to. And I think, truthfully, that's not something they're going to shy away from. Like that's a tool in the toolbox now. Having, Dylan Beavers, find power this offseason and end up hitting like 25 home runs at AAA and being a guy who can help, like that's a tool in the toolbox, they hope. Judd Fabian cutting down his strikeouts is something that they want to have happen. You could be sitting here next year and we could be looking at an Enrique Bradfield or a Vance Honeycutt or Austin O'Verne or any of these guys who are starting next year in the low minors are not necessarily, deep high minors guys. You can be looking at any of them and be like, all right, by August they're up. So let's only figure out the first half of the season. So I think not having a 5-year Anthony Santander contract on the books gives them flexibility. And it's a little less daunting to think about how they could exercise that flexibility than it was this time last year, as you're thinking like, who is, are they going to claim Daz Cameron on the waivers for the 9th time to be their right-handed hitting outfielder?
Right.
They did that anyways, but they also signed Tyler O'Neill. So well, that's what you got.
It's just crazy to think about the conversations that we were having a few years ago. It mostly was on the infield side when this team already had several big league infielders and they had this glut of talent that was waiting in the minors. But on the outfield side, I mean, we were having similar conversations. We were saying, well, this outfield is already so good. You have Austin Hayes, you have Cedric Mullins, you have Anthony Santander, Ryan McKenna's your 4th outfielder. You feel okay about him. Kyle Stowers is on the verge of coming up and being good. You have Colton Cowser, he's a top 5 pick. You have Heston Kjerstad, he's a top 5 pick. Where are all these guys going to fit in this outfield? And now Austin Hayes is gone. Cedric Mullins is a year away from being gone. And this outfield, you were talking about 1 year Band-Aids potentially to fill that 3rd spot in the outfield going forward.
And that's something too, as like, this was all used as like the Orioles should do something with these players because they can't use them. Like they could use them.
Yeah.
It's not on the timeline that anyone wants. Like,
Right.
I'm sure Kyle Stowers is much better, like happier to have the opportunity he has now than the opportunities he had over the last couple of years. So it's not good for like the players, and it's not good for like people who are impatient, but you need as many like, swings, for lack of a better term, as you can get. And they had a lot of opportunities to, keep those players. And last year they chose not to do that. Like that was something they did. I don't know why I am like really caring about this now, but like it wasn't like trading for Garrett Crochet or like Terry Skubal. Like, sure, they did not do that last deadline, but like they did a lot. And like they added like meaningful payroll for this year's team, in addition to giving up players who could help this year's team and next year's team and the year after that, which all matters. So like you're looking at a situation where they've done like they made those reasonable size swings. Like they have less cards to play right now, and like this feels like the most reasonable option to play the hand they have.
Right. That's why I think I get frustrated when a lot of people would look at a move like the Trevor Rogers deal and say, well, there wasn't really room for Stowers anyway. There wasn't really room for Norby anyway. If the prospect is good enough, there's room for him. And we've seen how injuries will take their toll on any big league roster. So those guys would have found a spot, and you never want to be in a position where you are suddenly looking year to year on who can we sign this year to replace this guy who, we saw in Baltimore when they had guys during the Buck Showalter era that they could write in pen in the lineup every day, but there was still a handful of positions that were carousel positions. Left field was one of those spots. And so, if Colton Cowser is ultimately going to be a center fielder or a left fielder long-term, it would be great to have somebody that you could write in pen in left field every day for the next 4 years. For the Orioles, you're talking about now maybe right field, maybe left field. If somebody doesn't work out there, you're talking about that position being in carousel.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the rest of the roster shakes out. That is okay if you don't have to worry about second base, because Jackson Holiday, puts last year behind him and is really good. If you feel like there's going to be a smooth transition from Ryan Mountcastle to Kobe Mayo at first base, like that's also a thing you don't have to care about. I don't know what I also don't know that they're counting on like this being the group that like, they know that things can, like, players can go up, players can go down. Like nobody would have been sitting here in January of 2024 being like, we're going to get 3 good months of Adley Rutschman and 3 bad months of Adley Rutschman. Like you want those things to not happen, but like you understand they're going to, and there's going to be players who are not counting on like solidifying spots for next year's lineup who do, and there's going to be players who we think are just like going to continue on the upward trajectory, and they don't. And that's kind of where it's at.
I mean, this time last year, we were saying Austin Hayes is coming off an all-star season, and Colton Cowser is just hoping to make the roster.
Yeah.
Now Austin Hayes is out the door, and Colton Cowser is a Rookie of the Year finalist and hoping to lock down that spot for years to come.
Yeah, and that's what, I'm already prepping myself for like not like getting like worked up about what happens in spring training, but like you're going to see there, especially, there's going to be some like non-roster guys who can be in the mix. Like, I don't think they're going to be guys who can be like multi-year contributors. I don't think there's like a Ryan O'Hearn type. They're not really trying to do that. They're just trying to like fill depth and have as many like reasonably talented guys as possible. But like, there's going to be opportunities for these things to shake themselves out, and the way that they've kind of covered themselves this year feels okay to me right now.
Yeah. For 2025, it definitely feels okay. And I think the another way potentially, there are still ways where Anthony Santander can make the Orioles regret their decision. And one of the ways will be absolutely mashing against them in the 13 times a season they play him for the next 5 years.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. That's going to be really interesting.
How they pitch to him, who they pitch against him. I'm going to be fascinated to see the splits of his performances against the Orioles. Is he going to do to the Orioles what Ryan Mountcastle does to the Blue Jays?
Yeah, I mean, I would be really fascinated. There's no way we'll ever see it. And there's also no way I would even understand it if I did get to see it, but I'd love to see like the one pager, like they put together like before opening day.
Yeah.
It's like the pitchers, like, here's how you pitch this guy. And they're like looking at like whoever the coaches are.
Yeah.
We know, we've seen it. Like we know how to do this.
Yeah.
But the thing that we all know about Anthony Santander is like, there's probably ways to pitch him. And if you don't do that and you leave a pitch over the heart of the plate, like he's going to be standing there and watching it within seconds.
He's going to be hitting home runs against the Orioles. I mean, that's a guarantee. He's going to at some point hit a home run against the Orioles. And I don't think that he has any bad feelings. He obviously loved his time in Baltimore. He said so a million times and posted on Instagram about how much he appreciated being here. But obviously, there is, anytime you face a former team, there's a little bit of extra motivation there.
Yeah, you need we'll see if he like observes like the soccer rule, like you don't celebrate when you score against a former team. I don't imagine that. I certainly wouldn't do that myself, but I know that there are some.
Sure.
Yeah, I would rub it in their face, but I think he would be. He's always happy when he hits home runs, and I'm sure he would be if he did against the Orioles too.
Absolutely. I just can't wait to see when he and Q reunite for the first time next year.
It's gonna be the biggest dap ever.
That just about does it for our show today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. Write us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and I will read it out here on the show. We are available on all of your audio platforms, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, all of those good places. You can watch us live on X and on YouTube every week. We're going to have more episodes. We are just 3 weeks away, roughly, from the start of spring training down in Sarasota, Florida, and we can't wait for the warmer weather because it is absolutely frigid this week. We just hate it. Thanks so much for tuning in. At John Meoli is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. And if you don't subscribe to the Baltimore Banner, you can do so $1 for 6 months to read all of John's great work.
Wow.
And Danielle Allentuck and Andy Koska and Kyle Goon and so much, much more. Thanks so much for tuning in.